Hello, everybody. Again, I will not be speaking, but you'll be hearing a man's voice on my behalf. I'll be doing sign language to all of you. So first of all, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you that have connected to this webinar and in this workshop. That's about inclusive education and technology for inclusion. I am here I'm a specialist here from the Department of Social Inclusion at the OAS, the Organization of American States. And so what I do is I work with the governments about trying to change and trying to include people with disabilities in all gamuts of their projects and programs, and their political inclusion. So that's what I do. So again, I work in the region, and we work in the Americas, and with human rights in the Inter-American System of Human Rights. We have the Americas, the Inter-American Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against People with Disabilities, which is called CIADIS. The first international treaty, it's the first international treaty that focuses on human rights, that obligates countries, the states, to satisfy and follow the convention. So then we have prepared, we have what we call the Decade of the Americas for the Rights of and Dignity of Persons with Disabilities, and which has extended for, in the last year for a further 10 years, 2016 to 2026, right, to promote, make sure that all governments comply with the convention, and to include people with disabilities in their full access of social lives, which includes education as well. Now, it is important to have this inclusive education because we focus on humans' diversity, not only on the person with disabilities in itself, but all of the human diversity. And that is what we focus on. And also the respect. In the Americas, we have been working through the medical perspective, which is a strong perspective, which means that it tries to keep special education system apart from regular education, from the regular education system. We at the UN have the Convention of Rights with People with Disabilities. We have approved the 2018 movement that all the countries in the region have, almost all of them have already signed and ratified, that requires, that is above the law, that is actually a law that means that the countries must include the UN Convention and the Article 24, which focuses on education. And the goals of this is to be inclusive, fully inclusive, without any limitations, which is the model that we're following now. Now, how do we have inclusive education for people with disabilities? We need to have full access. Now, our first goal is we need to, accessibility means that that we need to include that it's a human rights perspective for accessible. Now we have what we call the ICT, technology and information, which is extremely important for us, which allows us the accessibility of learning and the process of learning. Now, when we talk about this curriculum, it is a flexible curriculum, which means we're not asking for radical changes. We're talking about what are keeping your learning objectives, but find other methodologies to try to capture your goals and objectives. Which means trying to find different modes of ways of reaching your goals. We're trying to change this medical model and way of thinking to a more inclusive of human rights perspective, and the social model protection, or social model on people with disabilities. I'm really happy that you guys are attending this workshop, and I really hope that that you keep learning about what we do. And if you have any questions as to what I do and want to get into more details as to what I do, please let me know, and we'll be more in touch with you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for your presentation. At this point, we're going to give the floor to Diego Mariscal, who is going to introduce his experience in his studies and also in his professional life with the use of technology in his daily life and in his practice. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am very, very excited to be here. I think that the context that Pamela gave, especially in the policy side of things, is really important. I'm going to talk more from the lenses of my personal experience and sort of my personal journey through utilizing technology. So just to give you a little bit of backstory, I was actually born in the States, but I was raised in Mexico. And the reason that I was born in the States and raised in Mexico was because my parents were shopping, and unexpectedly I was born 6 months and a half into my mom's pregnancy. And so, surprise, surprise, a trip that was supposed to be 3 days turned into 3 months. And so, that was, my dad jokes that that was what led to him ultimately losing all his hair. But, excuse me, I was born with cerebral palsy, and the interesting thing was that when my parents moved back to Mexico, I think they missed each other a little too much, because 10 months and a half later, my brother was born. And so I have a brother that does not have a disability. So it's me with a disability and my brother that does not have a disability. And I think that provided a very unique perspective for my parents, especially for my mom, because suddenly you had, one child with a disability and one child without. And so she really struggled in saying, what do I do to make sure that I'm raising them with the same equal opportunities? And so she actually reached out to a psychologist and said, what do I do? Because Diego obviously needs more support and more time. And so I spent a lot of time, for example, dressing Diego, because he can't dress himself, and I have to dress his brother because it would be unfair if I didn't, right? And so she was struggling, and how to handle those. And what the psychologist said, I think, was a very interesting perspective, because he said your role is to make sure that both of your children are equally as capable and equally as independent. And so that means that you have to have the same level of expectations that you have for one versus the other. And so what that really made me, and how that translated into my life, was that I was expected to do the same as my brother. And that meant that if my brother had to make his bed, I had to make my bed too. If my brother had to get dressed in the morning, I had to get dressed in the morning too. If my brother attended school, I had to attend the same school with the same level of expectations. And so, and I often joke, even when my brother was about to drive, I had to learn how to drive too. And I'm the oldest, so I should drive first, right? But I think that was a pivotal moment in my education and in my journey as a person with a disability, because sometimes that meant that my mom had to wake up 3 hours before so that I would have enough time to get dressed. Sometimes that meant that I would make my bed and it would be completely wrinkled, but it was me being independent and sort of doing that effort. So that really grew in my mind, sort of with the expectation that I was going to have the same rights and the same responsibilities. Now, the place where technology really plays a role in my life was when it started to provide me with a level playing field where in areas where I was clearly lacking in the education space specifically. For example, as a result of my CP, cerebral palsy, I have trouble reading and writing. And and so it was clear in high school that I was struggling to produce those exams. And so really a breaking point for us was we moved to the US because I needed surgery, and we started to explore technologies like screen readers, like dictation softwares, like accommodations, like extra time. And so we really just started to look at what technologies allowed me to have a level playing field in the education space. And so that was really critical in the technology space for myself. But the other thing that's really unique that we don't really talk about when we talk about technology, other than inclusion and sort of leveling the playing field, is that technology allows us to do three things. One is inclusion, which I already talked about. The second one is access to community. And what do I mean by that? As people with disabilities, we are a minority that is often ignored and that is often not talked about, not exposed in the media. And so a technology like Facebook, like Twitter, like YouTube allows us to connect, as people with disabilities, to connect with one another and to interact and to exchange experiences. I was recently doing some research around disability and sexuality, and I came across this advocate on YouTube, Canadian, that has CP and that was talking about those same issues. And it was technology that allowed us to connect and to exchange those experiences and to exchange those connections. And I think in a world where disability is often not talked about online, and an online forum allows us to bridge that gap and to start to create those communities. There's multiple groups of parents that have been created on Facebook about disability. There are multiple groups of young people with disabilities that are coming together. There are multiple jobs and employment, and so it really, technology has become this tool of community. So that's the second aspect. And the third aspect that I think it's equally as important is the access to information. And what do I mean by access to information? I mean that as people with disabilities, we have rights and we have responsibilities. And so it's really important that we know what that we are informed about what the policies and procedures are on a series of disability issues. I'll give you an example. I was a couple of years ago. I was taking. I wanted to take summer classes, and there is this government agency that is supposed to. This is in the U.S. There's a government agency that is supposed to assist me with paying my tuition for school. And so I asked my counselor, I said, I want to take summer classes. This is the class that I want to take. Can you please approve it so that I take it? And he said, oh, we really do not fund summer classes. And so I left, and I was a little disconcerted, and I talked to some of my peers, and they said, oh, really? Look at what the policy says around that. Google what the policy is for this government agency, which is public information, and see if there's a policy surrounding summer classes. And when I look at the policies, I saw no policy indicating that we couldn't receive summer classes. And so I emailed my counselor back, and I was like, can you please show me the policy that states that you do not fund summer classes? And his response back was, oh, my mistake. I didn't realize that there was no policy saying that, please, here is what you need to take the class. So that's one example. Another example is also that when I travel with a wheelchair. And there are a lot of people that are scared about airlines breaking their chair. And so every time I travel, I print out the Airline Access Travel Act, which basically outlines the responsibilities that airlines have to take care and to take responsibility of assistive technology devices such as wheelchairs. And so it really gives you a tool as a disabled person to advocate for those rights and responsibilities, and it's really technology that allows us to have information at the tip of our fingertips, and to be able to show to the airlines right there and then, here is what my rights are, here is what the regulation says, and these are the consequences that you have to follow. And so I think as educators, it's really important that we see technology in those three ways. It is not just something that is going to level the playing field and be inclusive. It is something that is going to promote inclusion, but it's also going to can be a tool to foster community, and it's a tool that can give you access to rights and to information. So I think it's really important to highlight those three main functions of technology. And the other thing that I want to talk about is also technology. What is technology, and what is assistive technology specifically? Well, the reality is that assistive technology is just a tool. When we look at the role of technology in inclusive education, the reality is that it's a tool that allows or that facilitates those three principles that I mentioned before: inclusion, community, and information. But it is only a tool. If we, and I often get asked also, okay, give me some examples. And when we were talking earlier, when we did a similar seminar earlier this week, we said, really, technology can be or should be tailor-made. What works for some people, the audio readers, the screen readers, the apps that I use on my phone are technology tools that I've utilized to level the playing field for me, but it may be a different experience for somebody else. But what is really critical, especially as educators, is that we see technology as tools to facilitate those three principles, not as the basis of the principles that are going to help us achieve inclusion. And what do I mean by that? There are a variety of stigmas surrounding disability that also affect technology. To give you an example, I was raised to walk and not use a cane or a wheelchair. And I was raised with this idea. I was raised in Mexico, and I was raised with this idea of using a wheelchair or a cane is somehow less valuable or less inclusive as if I were to walk, or I'm doing a lot less effort if I use a wheelchair versus if I walk, right? And so there was a lot of stigma associated with me using a wheelchair. And it wasn't until I met other people with disabilities and I started to have other types of conversations and other types of, uh, of exposure to people in disability with disabilities in wheelchair that I realized that I needed a motorized wheelchair. Having a motorized wheelchair made me able to travel internationally, made me more effective in the work that I was doing, gave me an opportunity to travel overseas, to be independent. I didn't have to rely on people to push me where I needed to go, where I didn't have to rely on people waiting for me, when I got tired of walking. And so breaking those stereotypes, even though the technology exists and the technology is there, which in this case was a wheelchair, really what needed to be broken was the stereotypes surrounding disability. And so we can't really talk about specific technology if we don't talk about breaking the stereotypes surrounding disability, which is really the critical piece of it all. And I think it's really important that especially as educators, we work to break those stereotypes in order to be able to make people more comfortable around this idea of utilizing assistive technology without necessarily feeling stigmatized. And you can also utilize technology to make that process of breaking stereotypes easier. What do I mean by that? If you as a person, as an educator, don't have access to people with disabilities in your community, or you don't have access to a lecture with disability with a disability in your community, you can rely on technology and on online resources to expose your students to a variety of different disability lectures and disability materials. Whether that be the film Life's Worth Living, or whether that be a variety of YouTube channels, or whether that be even the webinars that we're recording here, a variety of different pieces that can help break that stereotype. So I think that's the extent of my talk today. I think I want to sum this up by saying really focus on technology in three as a tool that can facilitate three different things: inclusion for your students, building community for your students also, that is equally as important, and also giving them access to information and to their rights. And if we can focus on technology in those three ways, we can really start to achieve inclusive education. And the other piece that I think is equally as important to address is that technology is just a tool that will help you achieve inclusive education. But it's a tool that will facilitate inclusive education. But what will really achieve inclusive education is this mindset of setting inclusive education as a priority, and also breaking the stereotypes surrounding disability. And the stereotypes, I mean stereotypes for the faculties, stereotypes for the students themselves, and stereotypes for the disabled person themselves, which sometimes they themselves believe that they're not worthy of being included in a classroom. So the more we see that as the end goal, and technology as different tools that can help us achieve that, the better. And so with that, I think I will turn it back, and hopefully we have a dialogue and a conversation around this discussion.
Thank you so much, Diego. Thank you so much, Pamela, for your presentation and for your input in this important subject. At this point, we'll open the floor for questions and comments by our participants. And while we wait for this, I want to ask both of you, what do you think should be the role of parents, of directors of the schools, and also policymakers on this field? If you want to start, Diego, please go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, in complex question. So you said parents, you said policymakers, and then what was the other one? There was a third one?
Directors or principals of
Directors and principals of growth. Okay, so those are three different targets, and so let's talk about those specific. So parents. I think number one is parents. Be educated in the disability movement. Having a child with a disability is not a death sentence. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It can be, or at least the way that I see it, it's a blessing that will give your child a diverse perspective, a diverse view in life. And so do not view disability necessarily as a negative thing. Inform yourself, use technology to do that. There are ways to be connected and supported to other people. That's in the early stages. And then in the later stages also, recognize that your child needs to develop and needs to be exposed to other people with disabilities. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's a realistic expectation to say you as a parent, as a non-disabled parent, are not going to be able to understand your child 100% just because you don't have a disability. As much as we want to understand, I mean, race can be passed on to generations. Sex, and gender, you can understand your kids because you've gone through those experiences. But oftentimes, we can't understand disability because the parents typically don't have disabilities and the children do have disabilities. So as a parent, recognizing that you need to provide spaces for your child to develop in their disability identity, I think is really important. And again, you can utilize technology to make that happen. So that's on the parent side. The policy side, I think for policymakers, it's really important to include people with disabilities. There are a lot of movements that are disability focused that are not led by disabled people. And to me, that is the strangest thing. If we had an organization or a policy that was focused on women and it was led by men, people would be really confused. And somehow that is not the case when it comes to disability. And so I think that when governments and policymakers are forming policy that is specifically related to disability, you have to bring people with disabilities to the table. And sometimes that means you utilize technology to break barriers that would allow people with disabilities to be a part of that conversation, whether that be through Google Hangouts, whether that be through Slack, or other means of communication that will facilitate the conversation. And the other aspect, the final one, directors, again, the same one as policymakers. If you as a director of a school really want to focus on disability and really want to make disability as part of your priority, you should hire educators with disabilities. I have a friend who is doing a PhD program in disability in the States. And she's studying disability and doing her PhD in disability. And she's blind herself. And she was telling me, I'm taking classes from all these faculty members and none of them have disabilities. And that is insulting. I mean, you're studying disability again from a non-disabled perspective. If that happened in any other community, people would be really concerned. And somehow that doesn't happen in the disability space. So again, as directors and as principals, if you want to make disability an integral part of your curriculum, you need to hire disabled educators.
Thank you, Diego, for your
Long answer.
for sharing with us your opinion. And now, Pamela, do you want to add something else?
Said basically everything that what needs to be said. It is required, like what he said. It is very important for the educators, right, when you meet people, to learn about that disability, to ask, how just what's comfortable and how to proceed and how to learn from the people with disabilities. It is important to always to have an open mind and to sit down and have those dialogues with people with disabilities. And for people who make those decisions, those policy decisions, don't have just one solution for everyone. That does not fit. We need to try to meet the solutions according to the people with disabilities. For example, it's not like a custom suit, right? Because mine doesn't meet or fit anybody else. My needs. So every person has a different solution. So we are all people with different services that require different services. And again, parents do need to learn about the disability and not to think that it's an awful thing, but it's part of the human diversity, which is very important perspective that parents need to do. It's human diversity. Everyone can do whatever they want and do anything they want. And the only thing that they need is that opportunity. And giving the opportunity means giving that encouragement and not having those barriers or limits, because those are the ones that we put in our minds. Limits are only in our mind, because we don't know. We don't know what we can do. Now, can you imagine having by giving us all those experience, we can have as long, huge imaginations and meet any goals that are given to us.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for your answer and for giving us your point of view on this regard. I have another question for you too. What has been the role of technology within education from your experience? And if you can give us examples of instruments, tools that you have used that maybe our teachers that are now listening to us can use with their students in the classroom.
Yeah.
Pamela, if you want to start.
All right, so okay, Diego. So let's see. An example perhaps would be once, like when I enter the University of Chicago, I requested accessibility for my courses, and they said, okay, we will comply with the law and we will give you type captioning or CART for me during because they had experience with other deaf people or hard of hearing people who could speak in English and work fine using the captioning. But for me, that really didn't work that well because I do not speak English. And my signing as well, I needed a sign language interpreter for myself. So I had a lot of struggles with that university in Chicago to try to, and I had to explain to them that I did not need a caption. I needed the interpreters, which I didn't mind the captioning. It helped me. It helped me a lot to express myself, but I needed the actual sign language interpreter. Therefore, the university had to work with me in trying to provide me the interpreters in my classrooms. And also, when we were, for example, for a blind person needs Braille, but perhaps there's a student that was blind but does not know how to read Braille. Maybe perhaps doing large print, or maybe with a physical disability, perhaps a mouse, a special mouse that's designed especially for that person with that specific disability. So again, we have to meet those services, and it's not a one suit fits all. We can help them make it accessible for me to have that achievement. So I guess that's just one of the examples.
Thank you, Pamela, for sharing your experience. Now, Diego.
Yes. Yeah. So I think, like Pamela said, I think all technologies are not necessarily one size fits all. I think it's a matter of, again, talking to the student and figuring out what they need. That being said, there are companies and there are principles of universal design. I think, and universal design means one design that is keeping everyone in mind when they design whatever that product is. And for example, Apple is one of the great examples of universal design. Go to Apple, and I have it here in my phone. There is an accessibility feature, and there are multiple features for people who have tactile problems, meaning if you can't press the button here because you don't have enough strength, you can press the button on the screen. You can see the text larger. You can see the phone in different colors. I have multiple friends who are visually impaired or blind that love this phone because you can see a variety of different colors. You can also dictate from any Apple device. I use dictation all the time to see what's on the screen, and you can hear what's on the screen. So that's an example of how a company really listened to their customers and said, how can we integrate the needs of most people into this one technology. And there are some companies that are starting to do that as well. Really, like LinkedIn is an example of a company that's also really accessible in terms of their interface. Facebook is also thinking interestingly about disability and accessibility. I personally use iPhone a lot. Slack is a team management software that allows you to sort of manage teams and meetings, and it's primarily based on chat. So the great thing about that is that if you have a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, they can actively participate because it's mainly based on chat. There is also this wonderful app that I love called AVA, I believe, ABA, that basically it was specifically designed for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. And what happens is you as a hearing person will dictate to the phone what you want to say, and it'll transmit it into text or transform it into text for a deaf and hard of hearing individual. And multiple people can use the app at the same time. And so the other day we were actually having a meeting. We didn't have an interpreter. We didn't have any sort of technology to caption or anything. And we used the app, and it was. I mean, it wasn't the ideal situation. Obviously, we would want to have an interpreter or someone, but it was something that helped in between because we were able to, all of us, talk to the app, and the deaf and hard of hearing individual was able to read as the conversation was going. Those are just examples of technology that I use and technology that I've seen progress, but it really depends, and I think it's a conversation that each teacher should have with their students.
Thank you so much, Diego, for your answer. And while we wait for the participants to place their questions on the chat, I want to remind you that the materials that were used in this webinar, that includes the synopsis and also the video recording, will be available in the next couple of days at our virtual community of practice of the Inter-American Teacher Education Network in the group Education for Inclusion on the link that you see on your screens. We also have the YouTube channel where we're going to upload the recording of this webinar and we'll make it available for you. So I see that right now we don't have questions or comments. I don't know if Pamela, Diego, if you want to add something else to the conversation before we finish it.
Sure. I mean, I would be happy to just let everyone know that I'm happy to share my contact information. I'll put it in the chat right now to make sure that we stay connected. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, even if it's after the recording. It's Diego at together-international.org. Intern. So I just put it in the chat, and I hope this is the beginning of many conversations. I see that somebody's typing.
Yes, I see Urban Smith. I am interested in making connections. Are you in a position to work with a special school in the Caribbean, St. Lucia more specifically?
Yeah, I mean, send us whatever the project is, and I'd be happy to explore opportunities to work together.
Thank you for your answer. Do we have more questions from the audience? We still have more minutes left before we finish this webinar.
I think it would be interesting to see if Pamela, you have any questions for me, and then I can do questions for you, and we can have I think always having conversations among different disabled individuals can be interesting.
Sure.
I mean, I'm going to write also my email in case anybody wants to be in touch with me. And if you also have any questions or you need any support from the Social Inclusion Department, then we'd be more than happy to help with you in our department here at the Organization of American States. And also working with your schools to try to find any kind of alliance or support. So I will include my email as well on the chat room and my contact. And again, thank you for connecting with us.